This is indeed an auspicious occasion. I have two brothers. I don't suppose we've met more than 20 times in the past 40 or 50 years. Each of them a highly successful newspaper man. My brother Drew was London editor of a chain of newspapers, United Newspapers. My younger brother, my slightly elder brother Sandy, who Fleet Street newspaper man and editor for many years of the Sunday Mail in Scotland. And would you believe it? He's now starting a new career on a talk show in a radio station in Scotland. Gentlemen, an auspicious occasion.
Did you say auspicious or suspicious?
Well, shall we make it auspiciously suspicious? But there was one time when I think all of us were working on Fleet Street at the same time, correct?
That's right. I was in the old News Chronicle in Bouverie Street. Where were you, Drew?
I was at the House of Commons working for another organisation.
And I was the night news editor of the old dreadful daily graphic sketch thing.
Yeah, I remember that.
Isn't it kind of sad about Fleet Street? Is it finished down the tube, gone forever?
Well, the jungle looks fiercer and worse than ever, but really the prospects are quite good. As your old friend Roy Thompson used to say...
Old friend be damned, but I know
trouble
what
with
you
Fleet
mean.
Street is that it's got too many newspapers. But the fact that, in spite of all their difficulties, they all survive. The Mail, the Express, the Mirror, the Sun, a new paper called the Star, and then the heavies, the Guardian, the Telegraph, and the Times. It's quite fantastic. And the provincial press persists as well. But these days, the economic situation of the country means that all of us are in grave trouble. And as you know, Jack, across the road from this office stands the deserted building where, not so long ago, the London Evening News was published, one of the great London newspapers. And of course, when we were boys in Glasgow, there were 3 evening papers, the Times, News and Citizen. Not so long ago in London, there were 3 evening papers, the Star, News and Standard, and now there's one called the News Standard. It's rather sad.
Sandy, I think Brother Drew has been anglified and is a solid member of the
Wait a minute, get your syntax right. Anglicised.
Anglicised, anglified, and is a proper member of the establishment. I'm sure that when you come to tell me the death of the newspapers, you'll give me, and there have been many die, you'll give me a much more different reason. I'll
give you very different reasons. I'll give you the reasons I left journalism in 1974 at the young age of 59. We were taken over by a London mob, and the first thing they wanted to do was put nudies, what we call tit and bum, on page 3. I believe you call it T&A.
Correct.
That's right. Well, I wouldn't have it. I'm an old Calvinist. And I said, no, make me an offer I can't refuse. That paper has gone on from strength to strength. Nobody takes the slightest notice of me, but I still think I was right. Future newspapers, well, myself, now that I'm really a lay person, I get most of my information from radio or television.
Superficial, of course. You can't get the same depth as you can get from a good newspaper.
I don't know. I think that's just a slick remark. Some of the in-depth stuff we have on television is first class.
Well,
and on radio.
This was a very brave attempt by a very rich man to give the British public more depth and a high standard of colour photography. Alas, £6 million down the drain, the magazine is now ceased.
I could have told him at the start, you can't do it on a tight little island like ours. You can do it in North America and Canada, but you can't do it here. We have so much media coverage anyway. What's left for him?
I suppose so. But on the other hand, surely the truth of the collapse of the newspapers and the circulation is down to naught compared to what it was.
No, can I just reply to that by saying that in Scotland there's a brand new Sunday paper, the Daily Mail is about to publish a brand new Sunday paper, and the Sunday Express is coming into the market with a colour sup, and the News of the World is going to publish a colour sup. The thing is boiling away very well.
We've had all kinds of union jurisdictional troubles with VDTs and the rest of them. You had the same ones. Is it not a fact that your trade unions are really so archaic and your management so bad that many of them will forced under?
The unions are too strong, and that is especially true in Fleet Street, where extraordinary things happen on a Saturday night, where people turn up and go to sleep and don't work, and sign their expenses Mickey Mouse Sunset Boulevard.
That's right. And just by chance, I have my union card here, 1939. What a brave young man I was. And I was fully paid up, because I remember an occasion when my brother went with union card to cover a strike, and they said, let's see you. Yes, yes. Looked at the back for his contributions and said, you're out of benefit. Away you go. They wouldn't let him in.
What he's saying by out of benefit was that the shop steward and John Brown from Clydebank said, show me your card. Your dues only paid up. I'm not going to talk to you. But that was a rugged society in these old days. I think we all did our share of picture snatching and rugged reporting, did we not, in the Glasgow in the 30s?
Yes, I have many pathetic memories of that. Going up an entry, a close, some wee boy had been burned to death, and you looked around, and on the sideboard there was a little picture, hand-coloured, of the victim, and you quietly put it in your pocket.
You'd left 5 bob and slipped out the room.
That's right. I didn't often leave 5 bob.
Being a little bit younger than you guys, I came into play really during the war. when we were distracted by other things, so I wasn't in the snatching business.
I got to tell my little story about taking the picture of the guy, stealing the picture off the wall. Three heavy brothers came to get me. I sent to the art department for the picture, and it had been totally ruined by Indian ink. And I had to get Harold Bishop Dixon, a dreadful man, to give £5 to the family. Now, we had a good upbringing. You know, I got so angry the other day when one guy talked about our 93 Battlefield Avenue. I said, I've been back shooting our routes, 93 Battlefield Avenue. He said, why would you want to take a picture of that to show everybody in Canada? Respond.
Well, it's a perfectly respectable house. I mean, he obviously thought it was some kind of a slum.
No, I'm talking about the kind of lifestyle we had when we were kids.
Perfectly good upbringing, yes.
Yes, we all had to work hard. Some of us had to go with milk in the morning, and I was rather a sensitive child, and I cried my way to the milk shop, whereas my brother, on the left, made a giant killing at Christmas with the tips.
New Year.
I knew he was going to be a millionaire.
Well, those were the good old days. I loved delivering milk in the morning and papers in the afternoon and having my little private rake, as we used to say, of spare rolls out of the basket sold at a lesser price.
May I recall, for the benefit of our Canadian fans, and Sandy and I both have fans there,
Yes,
it's not a fact that somebody rang you during a talk show and said, go home, Jack, stay Sandy.
That's right. I'm very proud of that.
And I love the lady in Vancouver who rang me twice in 10 years and said, Drew, you sound just like Ronald Coleman.
Ronald who?
But we were talking about something else, weren't we? We were talking about Glasgow.
Talking about reporting, we were talking about family.
Yeah.
Now, each of you are both good talkers. I'm the wild colonial boy. Where did we get all this talking ability, this extrovertish attitude?
Well, I would think Grandpa Spot was a dapper little baker who drank too much, but was very good with the horses. And he used to have a lovely little moustache, wavy hair, brown boots, which killed him. He had bunions. So after he'd had his dinner or tea at night, he would take his boots off, take his socks off, get a basin of hot water, put into it a pearl button, and sit there and steep his feet. But he was a little show-off.
Why the pearl button?
Well, say, it gave off something chemically.
I remember sitting on the arm of Grandpa Spot's chair at King's Park, listening to the distant sound of an Irish radio station giving the tips for the horses. And my job was to write down the tips so that you could go around the bookies in the morning.
Is it true about the night Grandpa Spot died?
Yes, it's quite true.
Cue Sandy.
Well, as the mist came over his eyes, he must have remembered that he had backed 3 dogs, dog racing, 3 dogs, in what we call a roll-up. If the first one wins, goes in the second. And he asked for his favourite paper, the Sunday Mail, to check whether he had won. He hadn't. He sighed and died.
A likely story.
Do you remember Grandpa Webster, the old man?
Yes, with the toupee, the transformation.
Do you remember him going out of the room looking perfectly well and young, and he would come back, and we, the 3 kids, would think, something wrong with Grandpa Webster, something wrong with Grandpa Webster, and he'd taken off his transformation.
That's right. Do you remember the little sign, the little thing on the wall? When the heart is young at sporty, life begins at 40.
Talking of signs, I remember a little cameo in our own house at Battlefield Avenue when, if guests were staying late, my father would obtain from the sideboard a large notice which said, please move. This was a notice that was in use in the engineering works for moving machinery. So he would put it up the mantelpiece. On other occasions, he would retire behind the couch and pretend to begin to undress the dinner.
Yes, but I have nice memories of Grandpa Webster because he was one of the pioneers. He went to Venezuela as a tin miner, and in the old days, when you came off the boat, the first thing they did to you was measure you for your coffin.
More. Now, what am I going to do after this break?
Shut up, Brother Jack. I'll be back. I'm the handsome, the cultured one, the sensitive one.
You'll be back when?
Right after this break. What are you laughing at?
The Brothers Webster. We sound like a Russian novel.
I think we sound like the Marx Brothers.
Speak for yourself. Drew, the hole-in-the-wall beds, little story.
I wanted to say, before we left the days of milk deliveries behind, that I have fond memories of sleeping in the recess or hole-in-the-wall bed, in the middle, with you 2 guys, one on either side. And blissfully, I recall that you would get up early in the morning and go off and do your deliveries. But I also remember, and this is going to be the title of my book, and I claim the copyright for this, lads, that over the top of the blankets, we had a heavy overcoat. And the overcoat was very comfortable, except that if the coattails were apart, you got a bit of a draft round your legs. So the family cry was, and this will be the title of my book, Close the coattails, Father.
Shut the coattails. Father was quite an extraordinary man himself, though, was he not? Willie Webster.
Yes, we have a funny story about it. He was a very gentle soul, and he was a gaffer, swore that none of us would ever be engineers because he was always locked out or unemployed. And during the war, he was in charge of a large number of women. I mean, the last war, not the war before the war. And one day, one of them had been sick and brought in her sick line. And Father looked at it and said, "Oh, yes, what's been wrong with you, miscarriage?"
Why did we all go into newspapers? Was it because you started first, or because
It was because
Father wanted us not to go into the...
Well, Dad didn't want us to be engineers, and I wanted to be a journalist. That was the only thing I ever wanted to be. And my school teacher had been to university with Sir Robert Bruce into the Glasgow Herald, and that's how I got in.
You got in as
You
an office
followed.
boy.
I got in as a gummer. I took the tape as it came off the Creed machines and sent it forward to the editorial. That was my beginning.
I followed, and then you followed.
And I followed you at the Daily Mail in Glasgow, indeed, and I had the first job of bringing the coal in. What I wanted to say about the old dad was that I admired the fact that he was a precision engineer, and I'm surprised that none of us seems to have inherited that. My daughter has. What about your kids?
None of my kids.
My daughter Lynn can put together little bits and pieces and
Jack
repair
has,
things.
and
Like that.
Jack, who met our father, says on a number of occasions, near enough is no good enough.
Yes,
That's the way the old-
That was the message he left behind. One thing I liked about him was that he always wore a bowler hat as a foreman, so that he was easily identifiable by the guy having a quick cigarette.
In Inveraray, Scotland, the other day, a man walks up to me and says, "You're Jack Webster." He was from Toronto, Canada. I said, "Yeah." He says, "I served my time with your father." Anywho, enough of the family stuff. We've been very lucky in many ways, all the lot of us. But what about this country today? North American wild savages, American and Canadian reporters in the United Kingdom give us tales of unrelenting gloom. Britain's down a tube, index pensions, civil servants, nobody works, black economy, everybody's on the fiddle. Pick up, gentlemen.
We're going through a very, very tough time, and people don't know whether to say, "Carry on, Mrs. Thatcher," or "Pack it in, Mrs. Thatcher." But the one thing that we can be sure about is that she is not going to change her way. I've met her on a number of occasions, seen her at work in the House of Commons. She's the most fantastic, tough politician who never tires. She dominates the cabinet. She refers openly to the rebels in the cabinet as the wets. They present no problem to her at all. She's quite determined that this tough financial policy will eventually turn the country around. But at the moment, we're heading towards 3 million unemployed, and it's a very worrying state of affairs.
Your politics personally.
Well, we don't normally talk about that, but I am...
Feel free.
You could say that I'm typical of a kind of right-wing Labour Party person who had a great loyalty to people like Hugh Gaitskell, who is now very turned off by the fact that the good old Labour Party has gone so far to the left. Indeed, the emergence now of this new party, the Social Democrat Party, could break the mould of British politics. We won't know for a long time, but it could break the mould and present a whole new situation, especially if the Social Democrats have an alliance with the Liberal Party, who, after all, a few years ago, picked up 6 million votes in one election.
I always remember a piece you wrote, Sandy, in which you said, "I am," and you haven't got your English accent on this morning, which you do rather well, "I am an environmental socialist."
Now, I'm a cynic. I voted for Maggie Thatcher too, but I don't share the gloom and doom. I think this country's in not bad shape. We're shaking out a lot of our industries. We're grossly overmanned and so on. And I think the way ahead is good. We're still leaders in many inventive sides of industry. We've still got very fine workmen. I think we have a good future. And we have freedoms here which are envied the world over.
And yet the police seem to be demanding more powers. You've got race riots which horrify and shock people in...
Steady on. We've had one bad race
And you had
riot
one year before in
Brixton,
Bristol.
and we had one in Bristol. And the roots of these lie very deep, and to some extent they lie in unemployment and poor housing. I mean, kids of all colours leave school nowadays and can't get jobs. And in a deprived area like Brixton, which is near where my home is, it's easy to see that a small spark can ignite a great bonfire. And indeed, on the occasion of the riot you're talking about, it all came about because some policemen in a motor car saw a black boy with blood coming from a wound in his head. They took him into the car with the idea of looking after him and taking him to hospital, and their action was misinterpreted, and the bonfire took off.
Do I accept this rather calm?
Well, I don't know. I don't know anything about colour problems.
You live in Scotland?
We have none over the border. It's far too cold for anybody who wasn't born there.
Yeah, no racism in Britain, you're telling me? Surely there is
Couldn't
another
say
kind of
that.
racism.
Couldn't say that. Mr. Powell, Mr. Enoch Powell, one-time Cabinet Minister, does have people who support his view that we've gone on a very wrong path, that the streets will flow with blood one day, and when we have a thing like the Brixton riots, he says, I told you so. But Michael Foot, Margaret Thatcher, and David Steele